Okay? Okay, good evening everybody. Great. So for many of you who know me, my name is Subhash Ghosh and I'm the founder of TechTuesday UK. My warm welcome to the esteemed panel members for today evening and to all the guests present here at this momentous occasion. Before I start, a couple of quick housekeeping rules. The toilets are right outside. Walk out on the left, there's one on the left. Walk out further, next to the stairs, there's one more. In case of any emergency, God forbid, please take the stairs, go out. Don't wait for anybody. And don't need to quit. And the last but not the least, mobile phones at all times should be kept on silent mode, please. Great. Today, as many of you would be aware of, that is the launch of the season 2 of TechTuesday UK. Over the past 13 months and 13 episodes, we actually have covered a wide variety of tech topics, ranging from space tech to fintech, from mobility tech to Web3 and generative AI. It has really been a wonderful journey. For some of you who are attending TechTuesday UK for the very first time, as you realize, this knowledge platform is stemmed from the very idea of building a community that ideates, nurtures, and then fosters a free-flow discussion of disruptive technologies, which have the potential to impact our beginner lives. TechTuesday is a monthly event, which takes place on the first Tuesday of every month, where we're going to spend, like today as well, close to about 90 odd minutes, or maybe a little more than that, having conversation around technology. The most unique thing about TechTuesday UK, as you'd also realize, that this is a free-flow discussion where we do not have any given script or a given set of questions or answers. Moving on, this event would not have happened without the active support of our hosting partner, Greenwoods Legal LLP, and we must thank them with a round of applause. We believe in the power of good word, and I therefore earnestly request each one of you to spread the good word around during the event as well as after the event. Our Twitter handle is @TechTuesdayUK, and on LinkedIn, please use the hashtag @TechTuesdayUK. You may also catch up with the previous episode of Tech Tuesdays on YouTube. Last but not the least, we have created a video bite station, a video doc, where we will invite some of you to share your thoughts on today's episode of Tech Tuesdays. Your comments are highly appreciated, and for the records, this will be shared across all our digital touchpoints. So kindly ensure that you hang around during the networking and drink session. Moving on, as you may be aware that every episode of Tech Tuesdays UK is based on a particular technology theme. And the theme for today's evening is UK tech and global trends. Now before I introduce the panel members today, I need to take a moment to thank two wonderful gentlemen out here who had led the panel when we had launched season 1 of Tech Tuesdays 13 months back in January 2023. Given that today is the first episode of season 2, I requested these two gentlemen to come over and help us out. And I'm really grateful that they took that, they kind of supported us all throughout and came here. Let me take the pleasure of inviting Dr. Mike Short and Dr. Chris Moore to take the panel.
So good evening, everybody. Welcome to Tech Tuesday. Thank you for the introduction, Zubash.
Thank you.
Shall we kick off? Is that all right?
All yours.
Okay, let me just get my notes up. So I thought I'd just start by saying the UK and India have learned a lot from each other over many years, not least of which cricket. And it's very good to see a very competitive and spirited start to the season with one test each in the last few days. Today we're going to talk more about technology rather than cricket, but the rules of the game are very much let's pick out some technology areas of interest that should be most appealing. Chris, do you want to just introduce yourself a little bit to cover what ground you cover within DBT, where I used to work?
Absolutely. So my name is Chris Moore. I'm a technology specialist working for the Department for Business and Trade. In that role, I do a couple of different things. I support overseas companies that are looking to set up in the UK for the first time, or if they're already here, to help them grow their existing business. But I also work with UK companies in some selected sectors to help them to export. I cover right across the technology spectrum, so areas like AI, data science, enterprise, cloud, IoT, smart cities, data infrastructure, data centers, cybersecurity, and quantum, and probably a few others I forgot. It's easier for me to say which areas I don't cover, but mainly software. And in terms of markets, well, I support many markets around the world, but particularly Latin America, North America, Europe, Middle East, and some selected Asian markets, but particularly India. India is one of those markets that I do pay more attention to. And I have listed India on a number of occasions over the years. And I think with that, just to say, I'm very pleased to have the opportunity to come back. I want to thank Subhash. When he first invited us to come and talk at the beginning of the first season, I thought this sounds like it should be a really good series of events. And I've been back on a couple of occasions since then. There were a couple I couldn't make because I was traveling, but I think the quality of this discussion has always been very good, and I think it is only because of his efforts and his team's efforts that this has been such a success. So before we go any further, I'd like to give Subhash a round of applause. Anyway, back to the main topic. Mike.
Sure, I suppose I should just introduce myself. I used to work with Chris as Chief Scientific Advisor in the Department of Business and Trade. And as Chief Scientific Advisor, you have to cover all areas of technology where advice is needed. I now work as the Chief Architect in something called the Satellite Applications Catapult. But between us, we thought we'd cover a few areas that may be of interest. We thought we'd cover a little bit on AI and big data, some trends in that area, some issues to do with cloud and data centers, maybe some touching on future telecoms and satellite, perhaps then touch on some of the security and quantum issues that may be of interest, and then move into some of the applications that move into different sectors. So how is data and big tech being adopted by different sectors? I also would add that having been Chief Scientific Advisor, I drew on 30 years experience in telecoms, where I was the Vice President of Telefonica, but also I used to chair the Global GSM Operators Association, whose big event happens to be in 3 weeks' time, Mobile World Congress. So I may say a few words about Mobile World Congress and some things to expect if you're going, or even if you're not going, some things to look out for on the TV or on the internet as you wish. I think my start point, though, also ought to be ideas come from everywhere. You know, it's no longer a case that all ideas are invented in one country and stay in one country. They spread wildly. Equally, you can be surprised by where ideas can come from. How much of this internationalization have you seen, Chris?
A lot, and I think, as I mentioned, I cover many markets around the world, but just as an example, I was in Latin America twice last year, and you might think, why would you spend time in countries like Colombia and Chile and Argentina? And I think the reason is that some of the innovation that comes from those markets is very distinct. It's, those markets have sometimes not always been seen as the birthplace of new technologies. But as we've seen over the years, the same has been true for parts of Eastern Europe. Recently I was in Turkey, and again, some very creative and innovative companies. And I think if you take a step back and say, why is that the case in some of these markets? Chile is a really good example. Chile has run a program called Startup Chile for many years, and it has been the birthplace of many early stage successful startup companies in the region, partly because the government has supported it, but partly because Chile, if you look on the map, is a long, thin country, surrounded on one side by water and on the other side by the Andes Mountains. So if you're going to be creative and innovative, you've probably got to do it at home. And the same is true of some other countries around the world. Estonia, for instance, population of less than 2 million, has also got a very good track record on innovation because during some periods of their history they've had no choice. But I think in the UK we see entrepreneurs and creative, innovative people coming from many, many markets around the world. And partly because the UK is a very welcoming place for entrepreneurs. There are programs like the Global Entrepreneurs Programme, but also programs offered by other organisations that really help entrepreneurs to grow and to flourish, and also to access the funding that they need.
And Chris, how do you balance the inward investment requirements with the export requirements, with some of those examples in mind? Clearly, some of the entrepreneurs who come here want to be able to still relate to the country they may have come from.
Yes, and I think we see that a lot. So going back to the example of companies from places like Colombia or Brazil that come to the UK, they come to the UK because they see this as a great starting point for exploring other markets. So be it the UK itself as a testing point, but also the rest of the European region and to other markets like the Middle East. I was talking to a US-based company today, and they said, well, of course we would come to the UK first because it's easier, everything's in English, it's very familiar, but then we'd use that as a springboard to look at very many other markets. But the same is true the other way around, and some of these examples may surprise you that I've talked to many companies from markets like France, where they say, we're coming to the UK. Thinking, okay, that's fine, but you could stay in Lille or Paris and come to the UK for the day. But no, they want to come to the UK because they want to get English language use cases. They want to develop their technology in a market that is perhaps more straightforward, and then go to the US or to Canada or other parts of the world. And therefore, we highlight the fact that if you come to the UK, you can use the UK as a springboard for other markets. And in DBT, we have a lot of services and support, most of which is free of charge, to help companies on their export journey.
Can you summarise some of those services that DBT offer that attract people to the UK? Can you give a bit more detail?
So on the inward investment journey, we help companies in a number of ways. So today, for instance, I was involved with an event which was organised by European DBT colleagues, where we had a number of companies that have just landed in the UK, and they're now thinking about finding routes to market, finding which communities they should be tapping into, and that's where we can provide advice and guidance about if you are in the energy sector, these are the key organisations, these are communities that you can access. So that's for the companies that are already somewhat established, but for the newer entrants, the companies are saying, again, say from Brazil, I think I'm going to go to Europe, but maybe I should go to Portugal. You know, Portugal or the UK, I speak Portuguese, I'll go to Portugal. No, come to the UK, because we can help you to navigate the funding mechanisms here in a public sector from organisations like UKRI, or private sector, so from venture capital and business angels. But at the same time, understanding how the UK operates, how to navigate on the tech ecosystem, and in particular thinking, should I go to London? Or actually, should I go to somewhere which is perhaps more appropriate for my technology? So if I'm an energy company, I might want to be in Scotland. If I'm a retail tech company, I might need to be in Manchester. From an ed tech company, Sheffield is the key place. And this is not at all obvious for companies that are based outside the UK, but this is the help and the guidance and the navigation that we can provide.
And I think we've been top 4 or 5 in the Global Innovation Index for the last 20 years.
Something like that.
I don't think we're going to drop back.
No.
I think we've been really strong in the top 10 universities in the world. I don't think we're going to drop back. You know, the label science superpower has meaning and real evidence that we can actually offer if required. Can we go on to something like AI and big data?
Yes.
So what's the level of interest you're seeing in AI and big data, given some of the things that the UK government have offered recently, such as the AI Summit recently before Christmas, such as the new AI Opportunity Forum? Can you just describe some of the levels of AI and big data interest?
Sure. I mean, I think the one observation I would make, having been looking at this area for quite some time, is that there is no sector that is not uptaking AI to some degree. So whether you are thinking about AI in terms of the very popular ChatGPT type of generative AI, or whether you're thinking about using computer vision for the detection of tumours, or whether you're looking at machine learning to help you to manage your manufacturing operation more effectively, all of those represent opportunities in AI. So we see a lot of the established companies in the UK that are looking for AI solutions. But also, we see a huge number of AI early-stage companies in the UK. The Department for Science, Innovation and Technology last year published a report that highlighted something around 3,170, if I recall exactly, AI companies in the UK, of which 1,900 or thereabouts were what we would call focused or pure AI companies. So this is a huge resource to draw upon for anybody who's interested in AI, which means that we get many, many overseas companies coming to the UK and saying, interested in partnership, collaboration, buying AI services and products from a company that has a good track record. So I think it is not only on across all sectors, but it's also across all levels of experience of companies, so small companies, large companies, and of course government agencies. And as Mike said, last year, so beginning of November in Bletchley Park, the Prime Minister hosted the first international AI safety summit, and this was very much focused on the use of AI and trying to understand what we need to think about from an ethical point of view about the use of AI in multiple industries. That led to the creation of the first AI Safety Institute in the UK. And this builds on the work of a number of other organisations as well, like the Centre for Data Ethics and Innovation. But I think what this shows is that if you're thinking about developing AI, there's probably nowhere better than the UK to do that, simply because we have not only the tech capability, the academic capability, but also this environment which is really focused on all of the things you'd worry about, so transparency, traceability, fairness, and the ethical dimensions. Now that sounds like I'm blowing the trumpet for the UK. Well, of course I would do, that's my job. But realistically, if you look at the rest of the UK and think about measures that compare the UK is #1 in Europe, for sure. And depending on which comparison you use, it's either #2, 3, or 4 compared to other markets and compared to the criteria used, but always #1 in Europe. And I think that's an important point to take home.
I think one of the big things about AI is it depends on access to data.
Yeah.
And the UK is not the biggest country in the world, but one thing we do have is some really strong big data sets.
Yes.
One might say the National Health Service,
Yeah.
one might say some of the big telecoms areas, one might say some of the big financial institutions. Big data sets sometimes attract talent, but also investment in AI and data. Are you seeing some trends in AI that point to certain sectors ahead of others? Is it led by the big data, or is it led by something else?
So I think the uptake of AI and the access to those data sets is an important driver. So we think of healthcare as being a very strong one. We think of the tech sector and communications as being another one, financial services of course. But there are other sectors where you think they're a bit slow, you know, what's going on, what can we do to help? And so interestingly, last year Innovate UK announced a program called Bridge AI. And Bridge AI is trying to help sectors that have not necessarily used AI to a great degree to begin to look at opportunities in that space. So I think the 4 sectors that they looked at are manufacturing, construction, logistics, and the creative sector. And it's a mixed picture, because in manufacturing there will be some higher end manufacturing companies that are using robotics and using AI, but there are many what we would call more everyday manufacturing companies that haven't got it yet, but I think they're well on the road, and I think we'll see some tremendous breakthroughs in terms of use case over the next few years. But the creative sector is very interesting too, because at the one end we have high-end film and TV, lots of special effects, lots of AI, but at the more everyday end, in terms of AI for music, and I'm sure many of you have seen examples of deep fake technology for music, but I think this is a growing area where AI is finding applications in many of these areas because there is better access to data and because the compute power now allows things to be achieved that were never possible before because of the limitation of computing power.
I think all of those examples are largely in business areas, so business to business. To what extent are we seeing the impact of AI on consumers? Certainly I heard recently how PwC did automatic language translation at CES Las Vegas, the big consumer electronics show. To what extent is this a consumer phenomenon of AI as well as business to business?
So I think consumers are now very aware of the power of AI in a number of areas. I mean, for a long time we've had AI-generated consumer recommendations. So if you like this product, service, whatever, then try this. But I think now we've moved on a little bit, and I think consumers are recognizing that there are many more opportunities across multiple environments. And I think the automatic translation is one very good example of that. I think we will see more of those kinds of things. So AI being used as a tool to help individuals run their lives in different kinds of ways. And this is both very exciting, but also a little bit challenging, because you think, actually, I don't want this AI thing to run my life just yet. I want to run my own life. But the point is that AI is a tool, or a series of tools, to complement decision making, to complement people's general day-to-day activities. But I think we will see AI becoming much more of a tool that people don't necessarily question about use. They just accept it as being, well, of course I'll use AI for helping me with some of those consumer decisions that I need to make.
I've got a good friend called Chris Lewis, who is blind and has worked in tech for 30 years, but he couldn't have done it without the support of technology to help him. As he's blind, he uses a visual awareness app, which with AI will tell him verbally what is in front of him.
Yep.
So he can put the camera on me and he can describe an old man called Mike Shaw. But also, he sometimes goes into a shop and checks whether his favourite chocolate bar is in the shop. So the idea of using visual search the other way around to help the disabled is quite interesting. He also uses techniques such as text to speech, speech to text. He can't see, therefore the text is translated and he can hear it. He has reading maps. He has all sorts of things. So some of these translation areas aren't just about language to language, they're also about mode to mode. And I think that's a very interesting area of AI for inclusion, for disability, for helping everybody in everyday life.
I think the interpretation of images and the ability to search by image and to lead to a text outcome, I think that's very, very significant. And there are many, many things that would not have been possible until relatively recently by using that understanding of images. When you think about security applications, and that's not just CCTV and identity management, but it's also around forensic science and things. So to help with really fundamental issues that could not have been addressed without the ability to recognize images.
I'd also just like to point to Mobile World Congress, but briefly, just to explain it for those who haven't been. It's running in 3 weeks' time. We commence on the 26th. It's in Barcelona. It's been run there for 18 years every year, apart from the COVID year. They're expecting 2,500 stands, 96,000 delegates, huge numbers of speakers. I think 800 speakers were registered at the last count. Huge basis for digital innovation, and if you haven't seen it, have a look at the exhibitor list or the website. But when I pressed the button AI, I thought, how many stands are going to come up that self-identify with AI? And I couldn't believe that over a third of 2,500 stands are showing an AI capability. So this is AI here and now. You know, let's be clear about it, here and now. But the variety of things they're doing with AI is huge, and we won't have time to cover them all tonight. But some of them were looking actually systems integration with AI. Some of them were looking at billing optimization with AI, customer care optimization with AI. They weren't just looking at network platforms called mobile networks with AI. It was across the piece. So that variety is stretching that whole sector called mobile in ways in which we can't always imagine. One of the areas that I think sometimes is a challenge is, where are the AI tools? Do you have any comment on that, Chris?
Yeah, so I think many companies are developing tools for AI, and of course all the large international tech companies are doing that, and there's been a very strong focus on generative AI. But I think we should not lose sight of the fact that there are many small and medium-sized companies that are developing tools which can be used in very specific industries. So a good example of the company I came across last year, a UK-based company based in the Midlands, and they use computer vision. So they collect data from a number of sources, but particularly using drones, to look at electricity pylons. And if anybody knows about the electricity transmission industry, one of the biggest issues that they have is the degradation of pylons and the fact that cables may be in poor repair. So this, and it used to be the state, the situation where you'd have to send an engineer up a pylon and look at it visually and then say, okay, well, we need to do some remedial work here. Now they can use the collection of the visual data to interpret that, to then predict which pylons are going to need the maintenance before they even get to be an issue. And this is transformative for that particular industry. And clearly they're working with energy or electricity transmission companies in the UK, thinking about how to do that internationally. And I think that's a really good example. It may sound very niche, but for that particular industry, the application of that particular tool is transformational.
I think we're seeing lots of design considerations, survey considerations, even maintenance considerations that are using combinations of AI tools, but also drones or new forms of surveying. It's amazing to think that the camera phone is only 20 years old, but actually now we have sophisticated computer visualization. Yeah. We can actually do a lot more, digital twins amongst them.
Interesting you mentioned digital twin, because that brings me to a couple of companies I was talking to today, and one of them is looking at the application of AI for construction. Now, we talked a minute ago about construction is not necessarily an industry that's really adopted it. But this particular company is using AI from the early stage of construction, where if you're thinking about a big building project, you need to worry about the interconnectivity of different utilities, so gas, water, electricity, telecommunications. And of course some of those are in conflict with each other. So I'm going to run this pipe up and down. No, you can't, because it will cross the electricity line, you can't do that. And particularly if it's either a big new build or it's a conversion of an existing older building. And being able to use AI to map out exactly the optimum for that reduces a series of tasks that could take weeks or months to get right, now down to maybe a day. So it really reduces the time required, reduces the costing, and drives productivity. And I think as you relate that also then to digital twin, so for those bigger construction projects, having a digital twin, so essentially a copy of the existing building and all its infrastructure, coupled to building information management, so gathering all the digital data about a building, and looking at those two things together allows you then to maintain the building better and to anticipate issues that you might have with maintenance or other things that you need to think about just to keep the building as it's.
I think one of those companies called Sensat, isn't it?
Yeah.
They do lots of surveying over railways before railways have been constructed, highways before they've been built or maintained, but also major sites that are secure and great locations for potential private networks. So lots of interesting areas. Can we go on a bit further onto cloud and data centers in terms of how you see that in moving? Clearly there are some energy concerns in this area, but actually not all clouds, not all data centers have enough energy, and when AI comes along it's going to be even bigger. Any comment on that sort of energy tension?
Yes, because over the last decade, I suppose, we've seen the rate of increase of demand for data centers go up steadily as cloud adoption becomes much more commonplace across multiple industries. The fact that we now upload and download more content than ever before, and that's taken us along a pretty steep growth trajectory. But what's happened in the most recent past is, this is literally within the last year or so, is that many organisations have been developing their own large language models, so using data centres to store the data and do the work to create these large language models, which is a huge requirement for data centre capacity. So you will have probably seen data centre announcements in the news and earlier in the year, last year. But what is the change, and there are some reports that have been illustrative of this, is whereas we were kind of tracking quite steeply, we have now moved at a completely different angle. So this is really looking like exponential growth of data centre demand. That comes with some significant concerns and issues because data centres, as Mike said, consume huge amounts of power. So now if you talk to a data centre operator, the first question they're going to ask you is, okay, I don't care about where this data center is, because if you're doing large language model development, the latency of it, the speed at which you can transmit data backwards and forwards becomes less of an issue. But what you care about is the power, because whereas a typical data center years ago was maybe a few megawatts, now they're at 50 megawatts, 100 megawatts. So it is a huge demand for power, and therefore small towns would use less than a data center. So this is challenging not just for the UK, but for pretty much every market where they've had data centers. I think the UK is trying to steer a middle course where we are both, on the one hand, still an attractive location for data centers because it will drive the AI infrastructure, but at the same time recognizing that we need to manage that power requirement carefully. So I'm working with colleagues in other government departments right now to provide information to them about what's going on in the data center industry. And I think suffice to say that we're trying to work very carefully thinking this through. In some other markets already they've said, we've had enough of data centers. And in other markets they say, please bring them here without even thinking about the power issues. So it's a sensitive area. I think it's an area to keep an eye on. But I think the UK is trying to, as I said, steer that middle course where we are open for new data center investment. And particularly in certain parts of the country, like Scotland, for instance, which has a lot more renewable power. But at the same time thinking, is this the right thing to do? So not saying necessarily yes to every single project.
But it doesn't also mean pointing all the data centers to Iceland or countries which have cheaper power.
So a lot of countries, so the Nordics in particular, are looking at attracting more data center projects. But there are issues there. I mean, they may have cheap, accessible power, but they don't necessarily have the experience of building data centers. The navigating, the planning procedures in somewhere like Norway is not that easy. And they, relative to the number of data centers that we have in the UK, and I think the number in Europe for that as well, there are some concerns and issues. And whereas I described building these large language models doesn't require low latency. As you get to the next stage when the model is built and you're using that to make decisions about other things, then the latency comes back into play, and therefore you can envisage that you're still going to need data centers which do have low latency, which will need to be in locations closer to these major centers of population. And at that point, Iceland doesn't become very viable.
So I think you're hearing with Chris the importance of systems design and thinking things through thoroughly. It's not just where the data is, it's not just the space required, it's also the energy required and making sure it works end to end securely and with resilience in mind. The UK is strong on systems engineering, don't you think?
Yes.
I mean,
yes. We have got a good track record, both on, if you think about the data center industry, we have got many organisations who are very strong in that. But if you think about other systems, the kind of critical infrastructure in the UK has been well thought out generally. There are many groups that are looking at, for instance, edge computing, 5G, and all of those components represent vital pieces of the broader digital infrastructure. And again, I think the UK has done a reasonable job there to try and anticipate future demand, but also design carefully what is there today.
I think we're also seeing in the satellite world, where I'm doing some part-time work, more interest in cloud computing from space, content delivery networks, maybe from space. Would you like to comment a little bit on that?
So I think you're more of the space expert than I am, Mike, but at the same time, there are companies that are thinking about, as you say, doing cloud computing in space. You can do things in space in some other sectors that you can't do on Earth. That's one thing. But I think the UK has a good track record on developing new technology, and I'm sure Mike can tell us more about smaller scale satellites and how that has enabled a whole range of things that were not available before. And now there are distinct areas of the UK that have developed expertise. And I think down in Cornwall there is a sector of expertise, but perhaps you'd like to comment on that.
So, we're seeing lots of changes which are meaning people are doing different things from space. So So the cost of launch has come down.
Yeah.
The size of the satellites that are going up there has gone down. But also the cost overall of these new constellations has come down. So you can start to think about doing more from space. You may not know, but GPS, Global Positioning Systems, is 50 years old now. Now you think, hang on, GPS 50? Well, what happened there?
Yeah.
But it's not as if it stood still up there. You know, it continues to look at us from above, and we're getting more accuracy, more visualization of the Earth from above, more constellations adding in that position, navigation and timing capability. So we can actually observe the Earth and see net zero, see the weather, see deforestation, see flooding. We can see so much more from satellites, those big birds in the sky. Now you might think that's Big Brother. No, it's actually to protect our planet. It's to give us some benefits that might prevent flooding or prevent pollution spread. We've done some recent work with plastics in the oceans, identifying the big clusters of plastics in the oceans. And it would be great if we could identify them in the rivers soon, before it gets into the oceans. But it would also be good to look at spills, oil spills more fully, and we've done some of that. We've done some areas to do with observation of overfishing in the sea waters. So lots of things can be done because of the big eyes in the sky, so to speak. It's not about looking at what's happening in your back garden. But I think beyond that, we're also seeing a revolution in terms of communications from space. So the ability to both send and receive information to and from space, but also start to communicate with space. So what would that do? It could help us with backhaul inside mobile networks. It could help us with extended coverage to fill the current coverage gaps. Less in towns and cities, more in the countryside, more in remote and rural areas. But we can start to see the coverage challenge being addressed. So if devices come along as they should, which actually allow you to both use the different networks that your roaming capability can handle, you might be able to roam into an area that has no coverage today, but satellite will pick it up. So in the same way as cellular and Wi-Fi have come together 10, 15 years ago, cellular and satellite are beginning to come together. Now, it won't be for consumers overnight. It will become more of a consumer item in about 3 to 5 years' time. But for professional services, we already see it being used. Maybe it's two separate devices, one for cellular, one for satellite today, but we can see more integration of that. UK company called Bullet Phone got a product of the year last year. Unfortunately, they're in some temporary financial difficulty. Let's see them re-emerge. But a great design which combines cellular and satellite at the handset. Apple have already announced they're going to do messaging first. So in North America, between Apple and Globalstar, they will offer in North America some solutions where you can get messaging if you're out hiking. Voice services to follow, some data services to follow. They're not promising high data rates, but they're infilling the coverage to provide some communication that wouldn't otherwise be there. Does that answer your question?
Yes.
Yeah. So I think I'm excited partly because I also see lots of companies in this space. So at Mobile World Congress last year there were 55 satellite companies, and I'm expecting to see between 75 and 85 in 3 weeks' time. That's the size of the hockey stick. Previously there'd never been more than 20 satellite companies. 55 last year was a big jump, and another big jump I expect this year. How do you see some of the technology expertise in the UK flowing into satellite or telecoms? Do you get involved in that so much these days?
Yeah, I mean, to some degree, I think. Again, I was talking to a company today that has that interest and that expertise both on the IoT side and the kind of 5G side, but very much focused on satellite applications. So they're very interested in the UK as an opportunity because of the strengths of the satellite ecosystem here. So Mike's organisation, the Catapult, but also there are groups like Surrey Satellite and others that have very strong expertise. So I think just as you're getting that joining together of different technology threads to produce something more, something that was not necessarily available previously, I think with the skills part as well, you see that, and these distinct clusters that have expertise in some of these areas. So Surrey, I think, is a particularly interesting location because not only do you have Surrey Satellite, but you also have the 5G, 6G Innovation Centre at Surrey University. So but you've probably got more to say on that one.
Well, briefly, the Satellite Applications Catapult is more of a translation organisation, so we bring together companies to help demonstrate and show what can be done, more of a neutral host for technology deployment into the market, particularly prototyping, particularly testing. We did some work with OneWeb, we've done some work on Starlink constellations, we've tested it to see where the coverage is, that sort of thing. But we don't just test to make sure it works, we look at the speed, the latency, we look at the various requirements. We also run a catalogue of UK companies, 1,000 UK companies in the space applications catalogue that we run, and that's very useful for sizing the shape of the UK space industry, but also introducing new people to it who want help in area A or B or C or D. You know, it's a big area of activity, and traditionally, whether it's from a defence point of view or a civilian point of view, we've had strong design capability in the UK, not just in the rockets, not just in the orbit satellites, but also in many of those applications that are downstream. Some of the launchpad activity at Goonhilly in Cornwall is very exciting because of things like different types of takeoff of rockets, horizontal or vertical takeoff. There's a place in Sutherland in northern Scotland as well. So we've also got launchpad capabilities in the UK, not just the invention and the design capability. Shall we go on to telecoms a bit more?
Yes.
Yeah. Seems to me that as a global industry worth $1.7 trillion globally, the UK actually does pretty well. Well, there's always gaps in coverage, mobile coverage, always gaps in where fibre doesn't reach, but actually that's a pretty large industry globally. What sort of interest do you see in the telecoms area in terms of the sort of growth we're seeing?
So I think if we think about the area of kind of future telecoms, there are lots of different components to this, but thinking about the use of 5G, the fact that the UK has had experience in looking at 5G for many, many different kinds of applications with the 5G testbeds and trial sites, but also I think this is enabling things that again would not have been possible before. So the ability to transmit data very quickly, the use of edge computing enables things like autonomous vehicles, but I think that's really the tip of the iceberg, and I guess, Mike, you've got lots of other examples you could talk about.
Well, I think what's driving 5G is the data deluge. You know, the amount of data that's being consumed by consumers, businesses, governments, enterprises. You know, that data is the big driver of the 5G investment, and people want higher speed, more convenience, lower latency.
Yeah.
They won't necessarily pay for it in equal measure, however, they're looking for those things. Lots of the devices are driving that to open up with bigger displays, more memory, more of that capability. The networks are trying to roll out 5G very quickly. I would say that particularly the markets of USA and China have rolled it out very quickly, and they may therefore want more capacity with 5G standalone and also 6G earlier than some parts of Europe. The penetration of mobile in particular is over 100% in most of Europe. So already the 4G demand with earlier generations as well is satisfying a lot of the demand. But that quest for higher speed and lower latency is driving the 5G investment. We'll start to see fallbacks of 5G to 4G even more so when 3G is switched off, also when the PSTN, the copper switch network, is switched off. But we'll also see, I think, a growing interest in things like private networks. So already some enterprise customers are saying, for a science park or for their own premises, can we have a private network that is under our control, that gives the capacity, quality, capability for the private networks? So that's a big story for Mobile World Congress. More entries for the private network awards category than any other award category in the annual awards called the GLOMOs. So private networks are in and growing, and lots of interest. I think there's also interest in the wholesale side of neutral hosts. So here we have in London the London Underground, Transport for London, the oldest underground in the world, finally getting mobile on the underground, in the tunnels and on key lines. Now you may say it's late, but on the other hand it's bloody difficult to install it down there. You know, if you can imagine only installing it between the hours of 2 and 5, you've got a 3-hour window in which to install it, deep underground in very uncomfortable conditions. So it's being done very rapidly, and it's being done as a neutral host network. And by neutral host I mean it's a shared facility being built by Transport for London with the help of Bolding Networks, and then it's wholesaled through the mobile operators so that they can give you, if you're on O2 or if you're on Vodafone or on EE, you can get access through your operator channel direct onto those networks as they're lit up. But I think there are 50% of the London Underground by passenger destination is already covered today, and it should be complete within 2 years. Now, it's a really big underground footprint, so actually 50% of a huge underground coverage is
pretty good going.
We're also seeing neutral host interest in stadia, big football stadia, cricket stadia. We'd expect to see the same in India, but I think not quite there yet. It can be in some cases sponsored so by a single operator, but generally I think the trend towards neutral hosts to share the spectrum, to share the capacity, to share the investment is a trend I see. And I think that will occur in cities more and more, not just in the underground special case. I think we'll see cities doing that. Sunderland is a good example of that. We should also see more neutral hosts on rail as well. You know, instead of arguing as to who has the strongest signal in a railway carriage, can't it all be provided for? You know, some of the mainland train lines in Europe already have neutral host solutions. So I think there's a lot to go for there. There are some specialists. It's not always the mobile operators that leads. It's not always the neutral host that lead. There are lots of specialists and big systems integrators in that area. I saw I think the figures for Starlink, delivery of gigabits per day. There are over 400 million gigabits per day already for that global constellation called Starlink. So a lot of data is driving this investment, but clearly it's going to be paid for, so you can't cover every nook and cranny just with cellular or just with Wi-Fi. It's more combinational to handle the data. I think it's interesting that some of the fibre rollout is still continuing. You know, fibre isn't everywhere, and sometimes cellular has to do the last bit, or satellite may have to do the last bit as well. So we need to look at combinations of wireline and wireless together, or fibre and wireless together, and we're seeing interesting combinations thereof. In terms of talent, how often do the talent questions come to you about tech? You know, sometimes people might be nervous about coming to the UK if there are, if there's no talent available.
I think probably every conversation I have with a company based overseas will have a component about talent. Sometimes it's one of the primary reasons why companies are choosing to come to the UK, because, for instance, in some markets around the world, the ability to access AI specialists or data scientists, for instance, or cyber specialists is not necessarily there, and therefore they are looking to come to the UK to access some of those talent pools. But for companies like several of the ones I talked to today, are interested in not just the tech talent, but also the commercial talent. So people who are expert at business development, sales, marketing, operational talent. But I think because the UK has seen so many early stage companies go from, we're just a small startup to now we've got 100 people, but more importantly, many of them reaching unicorn status, so $1 billion valuation. They also demonstrate the UK's ability to provide those kinds of skills to companies that are looking to grow. So I think the fact that you can point to the UK as having, as we talked about in the beginning, Mike, about really outstanding university performance, but you know, if you compare the UK to some other countries around the European region, the UK has about 140 universities. I think the Netherlands has about 17, Ireland has about 9. So there are really strong comparisons there. And I think the other thing that the UK continues to invest in new talent creation. So a good example of that is the Centres for Doctoral Training. So in 2018 there were, for instance, 16 Centres for Doctoral Training in AI. Those were well established, they've grown to be quite mature, but again around the time of the AI Summit last year, there were a further 12 Centres for Doctoral Training that were announced, making 28 in total, which is an investment of around £217 million. So that shows commitment, but it's not just for AI, it's pretty much for every other area you can think of. And there are more than 100 centres for doctoral training across the country. But other schemes that are focusing on cyber skills, on data science skills, on infrastructure, IoT skills as well. So I think there's that very strong commitment. But it's also the case that the UK is looking at other sources of talent, and I think the apprenticeship program is very attractive for many. And again, one further example from AI, there's a company that's called, I think it's called Cambridge Spark, which is a training provider for AI. And they deliver AI programs for apprentices up to the highest level, which is equivalent to a master's, and they deliver that right across the country. So commitment, I think, from the UK on multiple levels to make sure that we continue to feed the talent pipeline. There are still challenges, there are still areas of shortage, but I think we're trying to do what we can to support that.
I think we've both been to an organisation called Faculty AI that also does some very interesting work placing postdoctoral students in companies, training them in AI first, but then making sure they have a good project to test their AI skills, and then they come back and present within 4 months. If you've not seen it, have a look at Faculty AI. They do open evenings every 3 months. Very useful indication as to how some placed postdoctoral students have actually skilled up in an area they were not necessarily familiar with and done some practical work. Otherwise the employer wouldn't necessarily have taken them on at the end of it all. So it's a training organisation but also a placement organisation.
And I think, just going back to the Centres for Doctoral Training, just to add to that, they also offer some similar kinds of things. So if you are a company and you're looking to engage with a given university on AI or on IoT, whatever the tech theme is, they allow the company to work with one of those PhD students for a period of typically 5 or 6 months, and it's at relatively low cost, so it's on an expenses-only basis. So this means, as a small or medium-sized business, you can engage with one of the key universities in the field, and then at the end of that time, the student goes back to the university, but the level of uptake of those individuals thinking, actually, I enjoyed my experience with that company, I'm going to go back. So it's a great recruitment tool, and it is a try before you buy approach.
Can we go a bit beyond skills into security and quantum? And just talk a little bit about some trends in that area. Clearly, with the data deluge, security is becoming a much bigger issue. To what extent do you get involved with security and cybersecurity discussions?
All the time. That's not necessarily with every single company, but what I would say, it is often with companies from many, many different sectors. So I will talk to companies in the energy sector or in healthcare that have either developed products that are specifically for cyber, or they are concerned about cyber. So it's a mix. But we see many cyber companies wanting to come and set up in the UK. Again, I should preface this by saying I've been at an event today where I've been talking to lots of tech companies from the rest of the European region, and one of them today was involved with the cybersecurity for infrastructure, and they saw the UK as a good destination because there are significant opportunities for protecting critical national infrastructure from a cyber perspective. I think the other thing to say is the UK, through the National Cybersecurity Centre, has been very proactive in trying to make organisations aware of cyber risk. So there are programs like Cyber Essentials, which is if you like, a tick list for companies to go through and assess how robust they are, but also other programs which are just driving the awareness of cybersecurity. And if you're interested in wanting to know more about cyber in the UK, I highlight the National Cybersecurity Strategy, which was released a couple of years back, but also there's a once-a-year event called Cyber UK, which is the National Cybersecurity Centre's flagship event. I think this year it's taking place in Birmingham in May. It's 2 days of hearing everything about the kind of new innovation in cyber. So it's a great environment to learn more about what's going on.
Let me just say a few words about quantum.
I was going to say, sorry, I forgot to mention quantum.
No, it's all right. Shall I go?
Yes, no, please do.
So in the UK we had a quantum program for the last 10 years, and it's looked at all sorts of areas from research through to deployment. but I think we can see today there's a lot more of the basic fundamental research coming into applied and implementation type phases. Some examples of that, so quantum key distribution, the ability to encrypt end-to-end using quantum key distribution, and that's being trialled in London at 3 sites already by BT with EY and Toshiba. In addition to that, we see lots of key players in this area who've developed some of the quantum-related standards on quantum key distribution, including NPL, the National Physical Laboratory, companies like Arkit. Some of them actually are moving into applying that into telecoms, but also into high data security links. We see another phase beyond quantum key distribution, though, such as quantum networks themselves, and thinking about how do you protect the data at rest from future quantum attacks. This world of post-quantum crypt, how do you minimize the risk of your data at rest today against future quantum attacks? That thinking has already been embraced in the USA by NIST, the big standards institute, and there's some very good work going on between NIST and the UK looking at how will that go into telecoms architectures of the future. We'll hear more about that at Mobile World Congress. But the aim is to protect the data at rest. It's not just about distribution, it's data at rest. We also see some strong work done in Birmingham in particular on quantum sensors, some great work on quantum imaging, some longer term work on quantum computing, some nearer term work on quantum PNT, position, navigation and timing. There's lots of capability, and we will see at the end of February significant funding going into some new hubs to be announced by the Engineering and Physical Sciences Research Council. 9 main bids on the final shortlist. They should announce 5 of those, and 5 of those, I would guess, would cover networks, security, PNT, maybe health, maybe one other. So a long track record, and the government have committed some $2.5 billion for the next 10 years towards more research. So to pay for those hubs I've just mentioned, but also for ongoing demonstrator programs, ongoing trials. And it has to be dealt with as an international activity, even if the UK is strong in this area. But I think we're probably in the top 3 in the world in that area, and we're open to collaboration internationally where we can. Security or quantum, both of them have some sensitivities about the skills that can be involved in that area, because some of it could be used for both defence and civilian purposes. So we need to be a bit sensitive to the security issues in those 2 areas.
And just a couple of more observations about quantum positioning in the UK versus other markets around the world. As you said, Mike, there was I think originally about £1 billion of investment in the first phase of the quantum programme, now $2.5 billion or so for the second round of that, essentially. But if you look at the quantum ecosystem in the UK, the Knowledge Transfer Network has published some interesting information. It's got a very good interactive map on the website, which will show you all the key hubs that exist today, and then ultimately the new ones. But also talks about the number of quantum companies. I think the statistics go something around there are about 30 or so companies that are working purely on quantum computing, but the total number of companies involved with the quantum ecosystem is around 220. So I think that kind of supports your commentary about quantum computing is a bit further out, a bit more complicated, a bit more demanding, but those other technologies around quantum sensing, quantum communication, quantum security are, if not here today, then will be here soon. But quantum computing is coming, it's just a little bit further out. The work of the National Quantum Computing Centre at Harwell is also very important in this area. But I think we see many, many international partners who are very interested in collaboration with the UK because we have this well-established ecosystem.
I think also the quantum electronics plays well into the photonics strengths in the UK as well, so we can draw on different skills. I think I'd like to just lighten it a little bit beyond security and quantum now, if I may. Let's just talk a little bit about the digital world, or the future internet, as I sometimes call it.
Yeah.
Which sectors are kind of leading the charge in terms of new approaches to digitisation and the future internet? Would you like to single out some sectors for particular praise?
Yeah, that's tricky. I mean, I think most sectors are doing interesting things one way or another. I think the creative sector in the UK is particularly strong in looking at things based on the internet. My new daughter-in-law my son got married last year, is a film editor. And the way that she talks about the film industry and the use of digital tools is just very, very different from times gone by. And it just shows the strengths that the UK has in that domain. But that's not the only area. I think if we think about use of internet, of course, enabling AI, but in many other respects as well. But I think it's the creative applications that shine through first, but enabling the consumer to do things that were much more challenging, much more difficult in time gone by. So the whole concept of digital identity being used across multiple platforms, the aspects around knowing your customer being part of that, so both security, identity management, but then making it easier, one identity that can be transferred across multiple platforms much more easily. So those are some fun things, but also some serious things, I guess.
EdTech?
Yes, and I think I might have mentioned earlier about there's some key strengths in the UK, but the kind of increasing, not gamification exactly of education, but using digital tools to a much greater extent. There is a really good trade show, expo in that space, which is called BET, which takes place at the beginning of the year. And BET is a real showcase of technology for the education sector. But again, more digital tools than ever before, and I think, but being introduced in a way that makes sense for the sector. So some robotics, but a lot of just very simple, straightforward things that make life a lot easier in terms of teaching young people.
And that, whether it's EdTech or creative industries, I think streaming is a driver of traffic. Content delivery networks are very important in that area, whether it's for creative industries, publishing, or EdTech. Someone likes to talk about transport. I think sometimes connected transport is a Cinderella here, and might need some attention.
Yeah, and I've talked in the recent past to a few companies that are interested in that space, so autonomous vehicles more generally, but also just managing your network of refuse collection vehicles. You think, that's not interesting. But actually, if you can have customized refuse collection, so you don't have to put your bin out all the time, and it almost tells you when to put your bin out in a way that is much more efficient for you, but also way more efficient for the collector. But transportation more generally, so the kind of concept of the digital bus infrastructure, being able to provide much more transport on demand, all of those things are, I think, are key themes.
Quick one, sorry. There are two questions.
Yeah.
Fine.
Should I just let them go? Okay, right.
No, sorry, don't want to break the flow.
No. We'll ramble on for hours if allowed to.
It's absolutely amazing. So many topics. I think I'm just wondering which topic is here. Maybe we didn't talk about God. Otherwise, we talked about
I think we chose to talk about most things, but yes.
I was just waiting. So AI, coming back to that, right? The most
Just
popular.
introduce yourself, Gautam.
Sorry, I'm Gautam Hazari, CTO and co-founder of Secure ID. So on AI, great things are happening here in the UK. Considering the, let's say, overall supply chain of AI, right? We talked a lot about the application of AI. Right?
Yeah.
But as we know, in the supply chain, the bottommost part, which will probably rule and ruling, are the multimodal foundation model and computing, which translates into chip, right? Anything, because in the news at least doesn't come up that much that someone is working on multimodal foundation model here. They're utilizing the model and creating application, which is also important. But to have an edge, it's also important to work on foundation model and also look into the computing, because that's what is going to happen this year and the next year as well, right? On the chipset. For example, whatever happened with NVIDIA and what's happening with ARM right now. So anything that's happening in UK?
So two things I would mention. So we do have in the UK some very innovative companies like Graphcore that are looking at new chips. We also have the announcement of Isambard, which is the new AI-focused computer supercomputer down in Bristol, right?
Yeah.
Beyond that, I think there is a strong interest in developing foundation models that are appropriate. The government, UK government, also announced the Foundation Model Task Force, so looking at that, or Foundation AI Task Force, which is looking at that very topic. And again, doing that in a safe and appropriate way is an important piece of that. But inevitably, developing the models is dependent not just on compute power but access to data, and that brings us back to the topics that we were talking about earlier. That the UK is still a pretty good location to access the data, but I think this is such a fast developing field that we need to keep a very close eye on that. So your question is very pertinent.
Can I also just add, I don't think I mentioned earlier on, that the Prime Minister's Special Advisor, together with the Secretary of State for DCIT, announced an Opportunity AI Forum, which is staffed by 20 of the top companies in the UK, including the group CEO of Vodafone Worldwide, including a senior director or even the CEO from Arm Worldwide. So it picked out some leading players that can look at the opportunities with AI, more in the context of which you're describing. So I think there's more coming.
Yes.
I said to Subhash earlier on, I think it would be a good idea for Tech Tuesday to talk to Tech UK that are hosting that Opportunity AI activity to see whether there's some dialogue that could occur, particularly with the Secretariat of that Opportunity AI Forum. They will meet once every 4 months or so, and the Prime Minister might come to some of those, of course. However, the preparation will be done by the Secretariat, and that might identify opportunities in that space. Not a guarantee, but I think it's a suggestion.
Yep, sure. Thank you. We've got one question from Rishi. You there? Rishi, can you hear me? Yeah, okay.
Yeah, I can. Can you hear me all right?
Yeah.
Excellent. So firstly, apologies for being underdressed for the session, the luxuries of dialing in from home. And thank you very much for the insightful discussion so far. My question is, let me introduce myself very briefly. My name is Rishi Bose. I'm a director at KPMG, and I work in the risk and cybersecurity practice there. So all of the things that you said makes perfect sense around cybersecurity, AI, etc. AI is a topic that is of interest to me, and I'm working with a number of organizations in the UK and abroad, trying to sort of assess how organizations can embrace AI in their day-to-day life to make lives easier, especially to identify vulnerabilities, threats, and other cybersecurity needs, if you will. And one thing that I see organizations struggle with, especially in the UK, is the data, because AI today, especially generative AI, is heavily dependent upon underlying data. And at the moment, the way things stand, data is all over the place. It's very scattered, like you have systems working in silos, etc., etc. I'm very interested to know how you see organizations are actually embracing AI. I mean, there are a lot of talks going about, right? I mean, there are technology publishing roadmaps with brilliant AI functionalities. But are we trying to create a solution for a problem that doesn't exist? Is a question that I'm trying to answer myself, and then trying to work with organizations again to see how best they can get their house in order for these AI capabilities to be well embraced. Would love to hear your thoughts on that. Thank you.
So maybe just, thanks for the question, very, very relevant, I think, to today's debate. Firstly, I think AI solutions are on different kinds of levels. So if you are developing a tool which will help you to detect defects in a manufacturing process, or in looking in an agricultural setting, you don't necessarily need the most sophisticated model in the world, but you just need to make sure that it works reliably. Now, if you're heavily invested in generative AI, that's a little bit different. But as we go further out and we talk about longer term AI products, then some of those will require very, very data-intensive models. But I think there is a spectrum, and I think we will see many very useful products and services that are available today and in the next few years, which can be launched quite happily without necessarily the very largest of models. So it will be, I think, a spectrum of activity, but I think GAM UK is well placed because of perhaps the access to data sets that we have in the UK, which is just not found in some of the countries.
I think that's true, but if I can go back to the premise behind the question, are we chasing our tails here? And I'm not convinced we are chasing our tails. There is a risk of hype, there always is, but I don't think we're chasing our tails. So if I split the market into business to business, I think within certain sectors, there's some really good data sets. Some of it might need some data cleansing. Some of it might need to be bridged across the silos, but there are some really good data sets. And some of those sectors who are running fast, such as telecoms, I think will do that and probably do it very early. I think in some areas of financial services, I think they'll do that and do it very early. In some of the areas of healthcare, it's a bit more challenging because I think there are more silos in that area. However, I think the silos can be bridged, particularly if we look at business-to-business type propositions. I think the business-to-consumer propositions are a bit more challenging because it starts to get into a more open environment, and therefore there are some data privacy and data protection issues in that area. Who owns the data? How can you share it? Can you share it with third parties? That becomes more tricky, and I think therefore we'll have to see how that pans out, but I don't think we're chasing the tail. I think some of the experts who are looking at consumer propositions based on AI are on it already. I do worry about the energy requirements, which we talked about earlier on. The energy to do this, not just people, but also power. But I don't think we're chasing our tail. We need to stay focused, though, to deliver solutions, whether it's in the business case, or in the business-to-consumer case, or in some cases, business-to-government. But keep up the good work.
Thank you.
Nandish, this last one. Nandish?
Hi, good evening. My name is Nandish Sadashivaya. I work as Program Manager Customer Delivery for Core Wireless. So I have two questions, one with AI and one other telecom one. The first one is, what is the AI impact on terms of the IoT deployments? Is there any solutions developed on the AI for IoT for fleet, healthcare, manufacturing and all those things? So any solutions that are currently being developed or deployed for the IoT side? That is one of the questions I had. The second question is, basically the telecom 5G private network. Can 5G private network be an alternative to a fiber network, especially in the remote or in the communities, gated communities areas?
Shall I take those? Yeah. So, in the case of IoT, we're already seeing some use of AIT in transport. One example, insurance. Think of pay-as-you-go insurance, where you need to know the location of the driver, the car, therefore you pick out some of the AI based on the data fed from the car and the location details, and that can start to give you some sort of ring fencing for insurance that says he or she is driving in a safe area, that's within their plan. But also alerting if you're going beyond your permitted plan and maybe paying a premium for additional insurance. So that's more AI-led, personalised circumstances in the IoT space. I would expect to see more IoT in electric vehicles, particularly for electric vehicle charging, where the location and information about the EV charging point is clear, knowing that the EV charging point works, and knowing that the EV charging point can bill you. I could expect all sorts of issues around the systems design in that area where AI can make a difference, particularly when it comes to the total load of energy on all the charging points, so that the transmission to the charging points can be supportive of the total demand. And that, in some ways, is a productivity tool first and AI second. It's using data analytics to its fullest extent. With regard to private networks, I think they've already been deployed in remote areas. Not in every country, but I think the interest in private networks is very high to fill gaps in coverage, to fill gaps in speed capability of the alternatives. It does depend on how you deploy it cost effectively, because it's not easy to deploy. But already we see lots of, for example, oil and energy companies, mining companies, starting to say, I'm not served by the standard fibre or mobile network. In my remote location, I can't wait until they arrive. I want a private network now. And because time is money in a mine, or in an oil rig, or a gas station, they're willing to pay perhaps a premium price for it. Will it compete between private and public? I don't think it competes, but I think it offers choices. And that's a different way of putting it. It will not compete head-to-head with something that's designed efficiently for scale, but it will provide an alternative choice for certain locations that need it. And my neutral host example is one area that I referred to earlier on, but private networks, there's lots of options that are being considered. Any other questions? Yeah. Hopefully I answered that one.
Yeah, sorry, I'll wait for the mic. Yeah. Hi, I'm Vets. I work in Microsoft as a director in media and comms. And my question is more away from the professional work that I do, more about somebody who's living in the UK and looking at the global technology progression and where we are in the UK. My question, before I kind of go into the statements, we talked about a lot of sectors over here. And my question is, are we also at least accepting the facts that are in front of us when we're looking at the global progression and where our country is? When we talk about the communications, whether it's telco to techco programs, or whether it's the one where we talk about where that's been sold to French, so to speak. We talk about healthcare, but there are 6 different silos in NHS. We talk about education, but our post-education after university doesn't allow the talent to retain in the UK. There are a lot of sectors every time we see over here, and we talk about 3,200 companies over here, or 1,900 is AI. But if you look into either in sheer numbers of volumetrics or in terms of the percentage, the sheer innovation that is happening in other parts of the world, whether it's Korea, South Korea, India, Indonesia, Latin, Eastern Europe, the numbers are not adding up. Like if you see the progression chart, it's not where UK used to be right now, for the various reasons. My question over here is, are we just seeing that we are doing really great? Or are we just seeing that these are the facts that we need to address as well as a country due to various questions? I mean, it's a hard political question, so I want to take politics out of it. but there's a sheer hard facts that we are not progressing across these sectors as much as we should be, based on what resources and sheer talent that we have in this country.
So I think if we look at the situation in different technology areas, it varies across each one. So you can pull out either AI or cyber or IoT and say we have number 2 or number 4 or whatever. I think what is true is that across that whole spectrum, on average, we do pretty well compared to a number of other markets. Of course, mainly the US will dominate most categories. China will probably be number 2 in most categories. But what's interesting is the next set of countries after that. And it does vary depending on which analysis you look at and which sector. But I think when you look at the numbers of tech companies in different subsectors, there is a good story to tell for AI, for cyber, for telco, kind of IoT companies in general. I think there will always be certain countries around the world where they have a particular expertise in a given technology area. So Canada is very strong in AI, for instance. But I think at the same time, the fact that we invest so much on R&D and developing that talent pool, and the fact that we're also very attractive entrepreneurs around the world, I think we're preparing for the medium to long term as well. And some other of our other competing nations have been slow to respond in that respect. So, for instance, in quantum, as you heard, UK has been in this game for more than 10 years, whereas some of the other more significant investments have come much, much later in terms of their investments in their own quantum ecosystem.
Can I just talk about speed for a minute? I think speed relates to scale. And I think although we've stressed the strengths of the UK today, I think we also want to stress the importance of collaboration internationally. Yes. And we can't just say because we speak English, everybody should come here. That's not enough. You know, I think we recognise complementary skills, but I think we also recognise scale. And I think one of the key reasons why we would say being in Horizon Europe makes a lot of sense is it allows us to collaborate better on areas of tech. In terms of speed, though, falling behind also requires other people to collaborate with us. And I don't think we see a slowing down of people wanting to collaborate with us. On the specific point of postdoc students, well, there's a cost of providing postdoc tuition. And I think decisions have been made to put more emphasis onto things like doctoral training centres, so they can be applied research and useful to industry as well as to society as a whole. So I think there's been some trade-offs on the cost front that you might say looks like a slowdown, but in practice it's a conscious decision to provide a skill set in a different way. The faculty AI example is training postdocs to get into the world of AI because we see a need there. So we see some skills shortages, which is why I raised the skills question. I think the speed issue, though, has to be addressed with collaboration in mind. You know, we are a certain size as a country, we've only got limited resources, we are a certain size that will need to collaborate. So I would say, because we are a willing collaborator, that will come back to really boost and reboot our strengths.
Thank you. We've got 10 more minutes to go, so feel free to ask any questions you have.
Hi, so just quick question, your thoughts on, so we talked about, I want to say we, the royal we, and in general conversations about accountable AI and trustworthy AI. What's your thoughts on, there's still the picnic problem, the user of the AI, the human interpreter. I have a recent use case, I'll go over a drink later, where the AI was absolutely spot on, but the person that was interpreting it was clearly at fault and just didn't understand the principles hilariously badly. It was sorted eventually, but yeah, it was quite an outcome I didn't expect to ever be experienced. But are we going to get to a point to remove the human from the system? How far are we from that? I mean, is it a wise thing?
If you can introduce yourself.
Oh, sorry, Simon Yarwood, Innovate UK, KTN.
So, I think that's a really interesting point, Simon, and I think the publication of the white paper are looking at AI and the use of AI last year, I think it was last March, then was kind of taken to industry for consultation. That's still ongoing work. But I think a lot of the issues that you just mentioned were highlighted there in terms of, you know, we need transparency, we need trustworthiness, we need to make sure that this kind of the AI that's being developed is appropriate for use. But of course there is a human component in that. And that's why there's at least, I think, 2 of those centres for doctoral training that are focused on the human-computer interface with respect to AI. There are, I think, 2 more that are looking at the ethical dimensions of AI too. So this is not a topic that's going away. In fact, I think it's getting more attention, more emphasis. So I think hopefully that will lead to some approaches which will minimise that issue in particular, or minimise the likelihood of that issue. But we have to recognise also that there will be instances where consumers might prefer just to engage with some piece of artificial intelligence because they think they trust it more. I mean, chatbots is one end of the spectrum, but there are other kind of situations where just engaging with a machine might be more attractive, and it's difficult to know how quickly that might arrive or whether how much pushback there will be. But certainly, I think that is one dimension of what's likely to arrive in the next year or 2, for sure.
Right. Vijay?
You've got the microphone.
Yeah. That's
okay. Right.
No, I'm about to ask. Yeah, hi, my name is Vijay Nayak. I'm co-founder of Secure ID, along with my colleague here. So one of the questions I really had is not really so much about electronics, AI, etc. It's more to do with food tech. Because, as you know, we're talking about a lot of the world's, meat products and land being less and less arable. So from what I remember, till a few years ago, I used to read a lot about UK leading in food tech, making meat and as well as other products within the lab, and helping productionize it in scale. Is that still the case? Is UK still leading? Is still a leading power in food tech, agri-tech?
So agri-tech, yes, sure, because if we think about the advances of the application of digital technologies to farming in general, the UK has come up with lots of technology. There are environments like Farm 491, which is a agri-tech accelerator in the southwest, and some of the key universities that are involved in agriculture are really looking at digital technologies. There is a program which is supported by UK RI, which is called Transforming Food Production, which is about applying digital technologies. It's about precision farming. So the UK, relative to some other countries around the world, is very well placed. Of course, there are always going to be other countries which are expert in this domain as well. So you think about the US, they are much more at the end of the, what should we say, the synthetic application of technology to the application of synthetic food of one sort or another. There are countries like the Netherlands which are very strong on technology for driving productivity in agriculture as well. So there's a spectrum of different technologies, but I think the UK is definitely in that leading group. In terms of alternative food supplies, so for instance using algae or using mushrooms or that kind of source of protein, yes, there is some work in that area, but in other parts of the world there is much more activity using insect-based protein, for instance. I don't think we're leading in that domain in the same sort of way, but on the other hand we have social political drivers to encourage the UK to be more vegetarian or maybe vegan in outlook as well, and I do see that as a very strong theme here. So it's a combination of different trends all at the same time, but I think overall, certainly the UK is very creative in that space.
Can I just point out that we've got one of the oldest food research stations in the world called Rothamsted. The rot should be R-O-T-H rather than thinking about food. But that was founded in 1843, and I sat next to the chief executive, Angela Karp, yesterday, and she was talking about the amazing things she's doing with crop rotation, crop science, but also animal husbandry, and in addition to that old centre, traditional centre, we can point to areas like Dolly the sheep, so genetic capabilities in animals, and also other capabilities to do with animal husbandry in its broadest sense. I think that there are some regulations though about food safety that make us keep that sort of thing going. So it's not just done from a productivity point of view, it's from a safety. But she was talking to me this week about digital twins and about the use of AI on farms, having completely sensing of farms throughout the farm to make sure the movement was checked, the animal health was checked, making sure the food quality was maintained, but also the productivity and safety were also addressed. So we've got the capability. Do we have huge cattle farms, the likes that you see in the USA? I doubt it. But I think we've got the science that can investigate new techniques, and that's used worldwide, to be honest. She talked about lots of international partnerships. We are not food specialists or agri-tech specialists, but I can just say, having met her this week, impressive.
But just as we were talking about quantum and having clear hubs of expertise in agri-tech, there are also 4 separate agri-tech innovation centres that focus on different areas, and 2 of them are focused more or less on digital technologies. So in particular, I forget the exact name.
Agrieti.
Yes, that's the one.
Which is about to combine with the other two.
Thank you. Good. I'm glad that's an excellent. But from that point of view, we have these centres of expertise which are looking at technology. But I think it's doing traditional agriculture much more efficiently, much more productively by using digital technologies is the kind of key theme, I think.
And as you said, if we are a key player in the science of it, then the influence is really far-reaching.
Well, I think one example, the apple and pear board that set up in New Zealand was modelled on the UK apple and pear board in the UK. So these things have happened over the years.
Thank you.
We were almost sort of time, but we'll probably take a couple of. Are you okay to cover up more questions?
Yeah.
So, okay, Rohit, I don't know. Just introduce yourself.
Alright, so hi, my name is Shub and I'm currently studying at Queen Elizabeth School in Barnet. And because I'm in education, my question was quite education based. So you guys said that the UK is quite strong in terms of our higher education and our masters and PhD programs. But of course, only 50% of the population actually ends up at university, which leaves half the population with little education and know-how about tech advancements and trends. So what would you say about pushing down this knowledge towards college education and maybe even secondary school education? I study politics and economics, and frequently we discuss the latest developments in political theory or what's happening in the world economically. But my friends in STEM-based subjects, I see that does not exist. So why is that, and should it be changed?
So I think from a training point of view, the apprenticeship programs in the UK are very strong. Lots of support from government for that, but the fact that you can do programs in AI and digital marketing, in software development, that exists right across the board. And there's a college in Hackney, for instance, that really specialise in that, with a view that the people that they are upskilling through apprenticeship programs can then go and work for local tech companies in Shoreditch. That works very well. Similarly, in Cheltenham, I visited the college for further education, but they were offering cybersecurity programs for children who were somewhere between the ages of 7 and 12, I think, to really make them aware of cybersecurity issues and to provide them with preliminary understanding of what cybersecurity was all about, with a view that they could then go on to study at school and then potentially do apprenticeships in cyber. So there's a lot of that exists. It's not perfect across the whole of the UK, but I think it's a very strong emphasis in terms of the way that DCIT is thinking about it.
Can I just stress that I think some children know a lot more than their parents about technology anyway, irrespective of what's taught. I did a campaign some 23 or so years ago about texting, because I used to chair the Mobile Data Association. So how do you launch SMS in the UK? So we came up with a campaign, teach your mum to text. Get down with the kids. And it was the kids teaching their mums to text. Dads too, not just mums. But it was very successful, and you could see the raising of knowledge and awareness just about something like texting. And the same logic applied to your first email or your first camera phone photograph. It's often the kids that teach the parents that. I'm not into gender bias or anything like that. Youngsters can teach the older generation a lot more than you might imagine from your question.
Thank you. Right.
Yeah, hi. Great conversation. My name's Rohit. I'm a co-founder of a digital care tech business. Fantastic discussion. Lots and lots of energy in terms of investment going into tech. Fantastic kind of vertical being developed out. My question centers around monetization. When are we actually going to see some of these inventions and investments actually be materialized and monetized? And ultimately, who's going to pay for it? What's your view on that?
So I think digital technologies can be slow to bring back revenue, but I think the investment community firmly believes in technology businesses, and you can see from the valuations that investing in tech business still makes a lot of sense. And there's quite often an effect that just builds up quite slowly, and then suddenly the company turns into revenue, and they discover that actually they're an integral part of what is a digital ecosystem that they didn't really expect to be part of necessarily. I think it also depends a little bit on the application area. So the monetization model for areas like financial services and retail and healthcare is well established. It can be tougher in areas like manufacturing, for instance. But I think we learn as we go, and I think we see a lot more examples of digital companies being very successful very quickly.
Yeah, hi. My name is Abhinav Khare. I work with HCL Tech. We also closely monitor technology trends, and I think we covered most of the trending areas. But basis our recent research and what we're seeing in the market as well, there's one area which is also emerging. It's been there, of course, is bioengineering, and two of the sort of trends there evolving is organ on chips and genome editing. So, I'd like to know more about what if I need to build an ecosystem in UK, identify the ecosystem who can partner with, engage with. How do we go about that?
It's very interesting you mentioned that, because Mike and I were talking before we sat down this evening about all the areas of technology that we could cover, and the one that we thought we probably haven't got enough room to talk about it tonight is exactly the area you're talking about. It is one of the 5 key priorities, and I think the UK is well placed to help drive innovation in this area. There are many environments that are very strong in that domain, and I'm based in Cambridge. Cambridge is well known for being one of the strongest life sciences environments in the UK, but I think Subhash, we need to leave that one probably for a whole other session and get some bioscience, biotech colleagues on. Mike, do you want to say a few words on that?
Well, I think there are some online references to the centres of excellence in the UK, like the Genome Project. I think some of the areas to do with engineering, biology, it's not our strength, but we can actually point to some of the... So there's a catapult that does medicines discovery, which is getting close to what you're doing. There's one called Cell and Gene Therapy. They've got websites with some information that would be useful. But actually what I think you might need if you're building an ecosystem is to see a directory, and maybe they have directories already. Certainly in space, we've got the space directory, which shows 1,000 UK companies, and that's useful to look at in space, and the Quantum one you referred to.
And I think the BBSRC, so the funding agency for biotech, that's also a very good source of information, because they'll talk about the current themes and the investment. And again, the UK RI Challenge Fund that has been supporting a number of themes that look at novel approaches there too.
Can I just say one final point from me? When I was at DVT, we launched 3 digital health directories, and may not be exactly what you're looking for, but each of those listed at least 150 UK companies that are specialising in digital health systems that are used in the NHS today already and were adopted during the COVID difficulties. The 4th edition came out about 3 weeks ago and is an online digital health capability. If you can't find it, ping me an email or ask Subhash and we'll get it to you.
And I think that was done in partnership with Digital Health London, which is a key accelerator for
so there are different incubators and accelerators that actually would highlight some others. The ones we put in the health playbook were ones which were adopted in the NHS and ready for export.
And we take the last question today.
Good evening. My name is Rachel Sen. I'm a consultant in financial services, so I basically make rich banks richer. Thank you for an incredible evening. My question, and I had lunch last week, I must admit, with someone from the FCA, so it's really opened the triple bottom line question in my head. So the question's around the human condition. Last week I read a white paper that kids, their attention spans are slower because they're sitting in front of iPads a lot more. With, my cell phone's really old. With phasing out 3G, I keep getting messages from Vodafone every second day that it's not going to work. pushing technology and the advent of technology and the advocacy of technology and how much consumerism it's propagating, as well as other problems such as attention spans, ADHD, etc. And of course there's this problem around, there's this fear factor around automation taking away people's jobs. How closely do we need to watch the human condition, as well as not really chasing our tails, but as well as having all this fanfare around AI and technology?
I think that's a very important question. I think we need to be careful about making assumptions about what is right for the human. And in particular, there are some technologies which naturally fit that help individuals to do things that they would struggle to do in other ways. But there's also technology for the sake of technology, and that is not a good direction. And we need to recognise sometimes that the simplest solution may be just to write something on a piece of paper. It can be that basic. You don't necessarily need something really complex. And I think recognising the differences in different types of technology requirements from a consumer point of view is important. And the study of the human-computer interface is also an important component of that. But I think it's something we need to keep an eye on. I think generally in the UK we don't do too badly, but there are some countries around the world where it's definitely technology for the sake of it.
I think I'd just like to touch on children, because I think children are not just the future, but we need to protect them. So I think there should be some strong age barriers and even location barriers to the adoption of technology. However, I don't think outright bans will work. I think just saying it's the parent's responsibility also won't work. So I can see a case for, in schools, reducing technology if it is proven to have a side effect that's the wrong direction. I think attention span has changed over the years, and it's not known what is the cause of the changed attention span. It's often assumed it's technology, such as digital and small displays and so on, but I'm not sure that's the proven case. So we need to be quite careful that we don't have unforeseen consequences, like an excessive ban, if I can put it that way. I would want my children, if they were young again, to be protected in school, but also so I could alert them if there was an emergency. I'd want to be able to contact them. But does it mean I'd want them to watch social media in the classroom? Definitely not. I also remember, because I'm old enough, when calculators were first put into the schools, and calculators were felt to send maths backwards. Well, I'm not sure my maths ever went backwards with a calculator. Managed to get quite well qualified despite having a calculator. So, should we treat a mobile phone a bit like a calculator, or is it much worse?
Wonderful. Great. That brings us to the end of this particular episode. But before we really wrap up for the evening, a couple of quick pointers. But even before that, my heartfelt thanks to Chris and Mike for being here, for launching season 2 of Tech Tuesdays, for making such an engaging, engrossing sort of discussion. I'm sure all of you guys can catch up over YouTube, the entire discussion today. But this was really a pleasure having you. Thanks for supporting us. Thanks for supporting Tech Tuesdays. Couple of quick pointers. While you enjoy your drinks outside, please hang around. We'll probably invite some of you for your bites in this room. We have 2 volunteers out here, Shubh out there, and we have Ifat. They will coordinate with you and sort of organize the bites. The next episode of Tech Tuesdays is happening on the 5th of March, and the topic for discussion for the evening is the future of mobility. Our hosting partner, Greenwoods Legal, is working on the location, and we will come back to you the moment we get a location in place. So keep following us on LinkedIn. I'm also really pleased to inform that Tech Tuesdays UK has formed a partnership with Mobile World Congress Barcelona, which is, as you know, the biggest telecom event happens in the world. And along with it, we also have a partnership with 4YFN, as you must have seen on the left screen. 4YFN stands for 4 years from now. As part of this partnership, for the very first time, Tech Tuesdays UK is running a live panel at MWC Barcelona this year. This is happening on the 27th of February, around 11:30 CET, which is Central European Time. The topic for the panel discussion is Tech Tuesdays UK presents GenAI lessons from the second largest mobile market in the world. which is India. And I'm happy to say that we've got 2 of the panel members out here. We've got Mike Short again with us helping me out. And we've got Gautam Hazari. Gautam, just raise your hand, maybe you can see you. And we've got, I don't know if Mari is still in the, we've got Mari Austin from Visa, based on Norway. She's joining us in person in Barcelona. I'm not really sure if this is going to be streamed all across, but in the event it is, please follow us, watch us, share your views. I think it's a great achievement from Tech Tuesday point of view. And thank each one of you for being with us and supporting us and making this happen. The last one, yes, we've had 13 months of Glory Stint, which is the 14th episode. But now it's time for us to make some extra better money. We are going commercial starting from next month, that is March 24. We'll put a small fee for every registration. Yeah. And in addition, we also have launched an annual and half-yearly subscription pack. Please get in touch with me or any of the volunteers if you have any queries with regards to the subscription pack. That's all from my side. Once again, thanks to each one of you for being here. Thanks for encouraging us, supporting us, and I look forward to see you in the next episode of Tech Tuesdays. Enjoy the games. Thank you.